That we're broadcasting. Yeah?
Yes.
Nobody objected. Okay. Nobody objected. Okay, we're going to run, folks. And thank you very much for attending. And I know there's another choice session going on around FICAM right next door. So you guys have opted for the privacy over the identity, and I appreciate that. What we're talking about here is a set of joint efforts by the Scaleable Privacy grant that was awarded from NSTIC, and these are the culminating efforts of our grant work, and they're related to the creation and deployment and refinement of an end-user consent and privacy management tool. So that's the focus here. Privacy Lens is the name of the software. It's open source, available on GitHub today, developed by the Carnegie Mellon Center for Usable Privacy and Security. So I think the best in the biz. And the effort of at least 12 universities and likely far more over the next year to implement the tool, to refine the tool, to develop the consent dialogues associated with the tool, to move this along. That's called the Lifestyles of the Attribute-Rich and Privacy-Preserved. I'm sorry that we no longer have Robin Leach in his wonderful curly British tone to say that. But that said, we will be developing a YouTube channel on interviewing people about their lifestyles of the attribute-rich and privacy-preserved. And then I think one other activity that I won't be talking about today, but that has been part of the grant that we're going to fold into this, is that we've been nurturing multi-factor authentication deployments within the R&E community as part of the grant. Got some really good traction. As that effort kind of wraps up, we will move the remaining part of that effort into this program, talking about how the attribute-rich always double-lock their doors because they have so many attributes behind there, and see if we can create enthusiasm and continuing momentum around the MFA story. One last comment about MFA, and then we'll dive into this, which is I remain very surprised that people don't recognize the tremendous leverage between federated identity and multi-factor authentication. And the poster child for this was about a year ago. Amazon, at a public meeting I was at, announced that they were doing multi-factor authentication for their Amazon Web Services console. And I went, oh, wow, cool. And you'll be allowing us to use our own tokens, right? Oh, no, we're mailing out tokens to everybody who wants this. At which point I said, so this is a clever way for Amazon Web Services to direct sales to Amazon Retail for suspenders. Because most of your users of the Amazon Web Services probably have MFA in their local environments, and now you're giving them extra tokens, and here's the suspenders that will hold the tokens. And I went to the Amazon website, and sure enough, there's 19 pages of suspenders for sale, and I really offended the Amazon dude in that process who said, oh, no, we're not trying. We never talked to the retail side anyway. But that said, a single MFA token can serve so many relying parties in a federation that one of the ways we're promoting MFA is it's your good neighbor policy. It's the way that all of your relying parties out there can leverage your MFA. So most people think of MFA solely for their own enterprise, and it's really in the federated case. And I don't know how many tokens people have from MFA, and I have 3 tokens. That's too many. And it is well within the technology today. SAML has the capability of conveying that an MFA was done, and so all we have to do is pass that token along. Enough said about MFA, but the leverage between MFA and federated identity is huge. It's one of those network externalities that we always look for to move this along. Enough said. Just a bit of context about where we're coming from. We've been doing federated identity inside the R&E space InCommon just had its 10th anniversary. We've been doing it for 10 or 15 years. We were 3 of the 7 SAML authors were SHIB developers, et cetera. So we've been in the space for a while. The infection has spread globally quite well. In some of those cases, the coverage of the Federation is 100% not just of the R&E sector, but of the entire nation. So in Denmark, the R&E Federation has merged with a national federation. You can't get welfare in Denmark unless you have a federated identity. Similarly, in Sweden, so we're starting to see instances where the R&E Federation has worked hand in glove with government to create a complete coverage federation. So that's the coverage globally. If you look at Europe, this is pretty typical of the embrace of federated identity. That's solid. And in most of those countries, it's 100% of the sector. So it's mature in many places around the world. This is good for us in that when we talk about the privacy lens interface, it's UTF-8 out of the box because we have to do UTF-8 out of the box for all of our work. So a lot of the internationalization issues have been handled.
What's purple versus red there?
Pilot versus production. And I think a lot of those pilots have moved into production. It's just a fuzzy boundary in some cases, as you well know, Jim. Any of your previous existences.
Can my registration process consume credentials from Europe right now?
In your registration process, well, we come back to the metadata jive that we were talking about yesterday. Do you know the metadata for these places? Do you know the signing keys for these places? And that's why if you plug into
But we could just get the schema, pull it out of the schema.
Yeah.
They're just regular old sound.
So the answer is yes. Roughly yes. A little bit of man behind the curtain kind of stuff, but this man has to go behind the curtain anyway.
We just map the schema.
It is that sense. It really is.
And the average citizen in those countries has a federated, is what you're saying?
Not. Further north you go, the more likely it is. So all the Scandinavian countries, yes. You know, it comes down to trust in government, and the further north you go in Europe, more trust in government. Further south you go in Europe, less trust in government. I won't.
Okay, you don't have
true.
to pick on the Greeks.
I was thinking of the Italians, but I just to somebody else. UK has a K-12 federation. Is pairwise with the R&E Federation. Recognizing issues, recognizing some different relying parties, but same exact technology, and I believe out of the same shop. So, federated identity, what's working? So clearly the basic model is working. This meeting is an example of that. It's deployable. The charts I just showed. It scales in number, in diversity, in metadata. It's international. It's standards-based, all good. The ability to adapt and extend easily, and the network externality effect for MFA. I'm going to pound on that, no more, but it's huge. Metadata is key. So unlike all of those bilateral federations out there that don't do metadata, they say, here's my signing key relying party. Give me your signing key. We publish a large, now 10 megabyte file of metadata of all the signing keys within InCommon. That size is going to be an issue, which is why we're moving to dynamic metadata. So if anybody is a geek enough to remember Etsy hosts, we're moving from Etsy host to DNS. A good step in life for exactly the same reasons. Success is making the collar really tight, and so we have to do that. Its use in other verticals. The largest federated and they've actually real estate, a natural MLS was made for multilateral federation, medical securities, et cetera. Its influence, hopefully we've had some shaping capability on NSTIC, certainly with the European identity efforts and with the social identity, and we've created a new layer of the internet. It's cool. So the first 10 years we did almost all the work on it and ignored the user experience because middleware was supposed to be invisible to the user. Well, now that we're getting into privacy and consent, that's where the work is. And so we are starting to, the next 5 years is all going to be end-user experience modulo that we have to do the dynamic metadata and a few other things. So what's not working? you know, populating, releasing, and using attributes. I have basically universities in this country are what we call attribute lieutenants. They just don't release attributes other than, well, we have an active authentication that occurred for this user. Here's an opaque, non-correlating identifier. Work with it. Well, most applications need more than that. What do we do about those other attributes? It's a real pain point. The international complexities around attributes are really hard too. The social identity providers' rules of engagement, if you didn't notice, Yahoo 9 months ago started to reassign email addresses. For all the relying parties who use that email address as an anchor identifier, you are no longer sure that you're dealing with the same human being now. That's disconcerting. When confronted, Yahoo said, yeah, that's our policy. For the good email address, we're going to recycle. So their attribute release, we run a social SAML gateway. Good stuff. Except the attributes that the social identity providers choose to release varies week to week on some whim deep into the organization. So usually it's a gush of all kinds of self-asserted attributes, but then Yahoo will change, or Google will change what they're releasing this week. Why? Did they notify anybody? Okay. The economics of LA, I won't go into. Federated incident handling. I think we had a presentation yesterday that Don Tebow mentioned, shared signals. It's a nice idea. So this is taken out of a slide deck from a webinar. I'm going to just use the agenda for this to tell you what we're talking about. I want to start with just an overview of what we're doing here, the policy issues. I want to get into privacy lens deeply. I want to talk a little bit about attribute rich. So we have a 2+ year grant from MSTIC. Standard boiler on there that should make the NPO look really good. It's right at the bottom of the slide. So we have several focal points. The MFA piece, the citizen-centric, and the privacy manager is what we're talking about there. We have a website for that, and now we have this particular program, LARP, that also has its website. So identity vision. We want rich attributes and active end-user privacy management options for those attributes on a meaningful level. I'll jump down to bullet 4. Identity management isn't about identity. It's about attributes, some of which may be identifiers which connect to a specific identity. And here's where I go off into my blah, blah, blah that I will spare you from. But this is a rat hole I live in, and I love, and I'll spare you of all of that stuff. But some of the attributes can be identifiers. I just bent Anil's ear about keeping opaque identifiers in the biz so that we can do privacy in the FICAM gateway as well as identity. It's a very interesting idea. I think he'll pursue it, but as he said, the federal government can't lead that. So then we're into lifestyles of the attribute rich and privacy preserved. It is not live action role playing. Thank you, Mike. That is a potential Republican congressman from Florida who, when this photo hit, became less potential.
In California, he'd have been elected out that thick.
So it's not live action role playing. It is lifestyles of the avatar rich and privacy, attribute rich and privacy preserved. A set of avatar institutions. We've got Harvard, we've got Berkeley, we've got the University of Washington, the University of Chicago. We've got some non-usual suspects as well, Lafayette College, Swarthmore College, because we really want a cross-section of institutions to participate. We're focusing largely on attribute release and end-user consent tools. We want them to be informed, revocable, offline, lots of issues. We want to be respectful of the international space. We're also going to be fostering attribute-based accessibility mechanisms. I'll just mention that before this work started, it was very difficult to mention privacy and accessibility in the same sentence. And for the first time, the people who have accessibility needs will have privacy management as well going forward. That's a goodness. We think that's a goodness. So, for example, what that would look like is I can release my vision attribute needs to a website so I can look at the job ads. But they don't need to know that I'm mobility impaired at this point. when I applied for the job, that other disabilities need to come forward. Wouldn't it be, and so for the first time, a community that has not had privacy, the accessibility community, can have it. That's goodness. Attribute-based veteran services, I'm afraid we're going to have to roll this one ourselves because the group we were looking to lead this is off chasing ka-ching. But maybe it'll work. It's a slam dunk activity to do, and there's the website for LARC. So what are the issues we're looking at? User consent and attribute release is the big one. That's what the rest of this talk will be about. In doing this, we're definitely leveraging the trust mark conversations that have gone before. We have trust marks deployed within our federation. The one that's most used is a research and scholarship category. We're going to take the icon associated with that trust mark and permeate it through the privacy manager. So the user will see they're dealing with an application that has been verified by an auditor to be minimal in its need for attributes. We'll properly dispose of the attributes at the end, and a set of other considerations which the auditor enforces on the applications. Let's move that trust mark into the user experience so the user can use that knowledge in making a decision about attribute release. Where there's the issue about people that are actually populating all the attributes. Just to give you a perspective, in common, 10 years running, 6 attributes defined as payloads. We may add a 7th, but we're tight-fisted about attributes. NEAF, 300 attributes. When you ask them how many get populated, a handful. Well, creating attributes that don't get populated means relying parties go, what good is the attribute if I can't count on it being out there? Absolutely an issue. International federation. So one of the more interesting aspects of consent is that everybody believes it's going to be needed in an international context, but not clear yet where. So the Swiss Federation created the first version of this privacy manager about 8 years ago. 3 universities deployed. The Swiss Federation decided a year ago that they're going to need a consent module for international use. Not quite sure yet, but they put that requirement out there. Over a third of the organizations now inside the Swiss Federation have deployed the consent module. So it's pretty clear that international considerations may drive consent, international campuses, and then lastly, we don't want this to be a painful experience, and we're looking a lot at how do we avoid the pain of privacy management. I'll come back to that in a second. So how do attributes get released today? In actual production, it's almost always on a contractual basis. The relying party says, I need these apps, I need these attributes, and the organization at the helm releases them because they signed a contract. We outsource email to Google. We outsource travel accounting to somebody else. Here's the attributes they need. The user, don't worry about it. We've done the decision at the enterprise level. It's just the way it works. You signed a contract when you entered the university to accept these things, etc. On the other hand, most services out there are non-contractual. And so some relying parties we tag to help the IGP decide to release those attributes, the research and scholarship tag. But for all that is non-contractual and not tagged, it's a world of pain out there for our users. And what happens if you don't get the right attributes released? What message do we give you? 404, file not found. But this is a relying party issue. We're not going to tell the relying party how to describe the pain that just happened to the user. And how does the user avoid that pain? They go and use their Gmail account, which spills all kinds of attributes to the relying party. They may be self-asserted versus verified attributes. But the pain is gone. I'm in my application. Life is good. And we have that phenomenon happening all over the freaking place because I have these attribute-retentive institutions. There's a list of all the applications that are pain points out there and even more. And by the way, I'll just mention that the relying party doesn't even know what attributes they ask for. So when we go in there and say, so what attributes do you need? They go, give us the menu, and then it gets really weird and they don't understand the menu. So it's a two-sided problem, but we're working on it.
Is it going to be more than a two-sided problem when we have multiple attribute providers?
So what so in our model right now, Jim, by and large, attributes are aggregated for storage at the IDP. And I know that doesn't scale, and it doesn't even scale in our world. But right now, at least, for the attributes that we're working with, because we've only defined 6 or 7, the IDP tends to have those. And they're an email address or a login name, they're a first name, last name, display name, your affiliation to the institution. Boy, I don't know, there's 1 or 2 other attributes out there, very, very thin set. So
the answer to that question, so long as you have minimal number of attributes and are singly controlled, you can not have to deal with Jim's problem. But to the extent that you're taking attributes from sources that have not necessarily the same databases and not necessarily attributes with the same values or competing values,
Right, and Jim, we do attribute aggregation all the time in our world. So we recognize that it's a legitimate need. But right now, at least, the attributes that we're passing are by and large stored at the IDP. They're often captured at the IDP. They may not be sources of authority. Think citizenship. We're not a source of authority, but now we're required by the federal government.
But what is the authoritative source rather versus source?
Right, okay. So, but we have a business process that requires us to capture citizenship for every student now. So, you know, we're semi-authoritative, is that a word?
There is that gray area.
There is
Well,
that,
we're
all
going to
of
talk about that at the roundtable this afternoon, right? It's attribute authority and, you know, confidence in that.
I won't get into all the issues of international PII and everything else, but, you know, if you're under 18 in Australia, you're not supposed to be on the internet except as a signature from a parent. But what happens if you're a foreigner in Australia? What happens if you're Australian in a foreign country? Okay. So, let me talk about consent in the law before we start to show the privacy ones, because we've been pretty much following the EU privacy directives because they're the hardest in the biz. And so, and they also have national level laws, but they tend to be EU-centric, and that's problematic. However, I will direct you to Article 7 of the EU Privacy Directive, which stipulates the situations in which you need either user consent or alternative justification. And that phrase, alternative justification, is a temptation because people think consent is too hard, so I could go to the alternative justifications, which include standard exceptions. If you're lying there in the emergency room unconscious and we need attributes about you, right, we're going to get them. And we want you to get them.
And on your first line there, where you say lacking national level laws, there are a couple of federations out there that cross borders, JIPDEC being one of them. Is that a help or a hindrance from what you've seen so far?
So all of the federations I deal with, Jim, stop at their national borders.
Okay.
That said, there are international members of InCommon, so oops.
Okay.
But they tend to be the relying parties more than the identity providers. I think all of our identity providers right now are U.S.-based. And I think that's true in almost all countries. Consent now comes with requirements. It's been piling on. It needs to be informed. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be revocable, et cetera. And then, again, the standard wisdom out there is that consent is hard to do. We're trying to change that. And you'll see the screens in just a second. And I'll also say the most consequential button, and I'll come back to this time and again, is the button that either says accept, yes, I agree, or something else. And what the research shows is what word you put in that button has a tremendous consequence on the thinking processes of the human behind this. And you'll see that Google puts accept or die, where we're going to put in yes. Come back to that in the design issues, but that's an important screen. So there's the Google consent screen. Oh my God, is that helpful? That's the one I use to go to NIH. Google consent screen to go to ID ecosystem because I can't use any of the 400 IDPs and InCommon to get to the always flame about, but it's a sensitive issue. So I go to this consent. I go. And notice the accept open. the more information for the field, field-based information about the account. What an open file with the door. So I've got this screen. Name, public profile, URL, phone number, gender, country, language, and time zone, and I don't even know what that says. It must say okay, because that's all they ever say. So I admire all the white space there. Let me just flash quickly to the Privacy Lens UI. A slightly different version of a UI. We weren't so tight with our white space. It's a goodness, I believe, but you know, Google has trained you that white space is good. In this case, white space is obscuring. And by the way, when I asked the developers at Carnegie Mellon a while ago, where are the best usability experts in the world, they said Google. Go back to that screen. If you're good on usability, how do you come up with a screen like that? Well, I leave it.
Depends on what you want it used for.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you so much, Stuart. It's a business model issue. It isn't a usability expertise issue. Enough said. Except I'm going to say more about it because I run on about this shit. Sorry.
Because people pointed you back at Google? Is this a situation like cryptographers or never admit to being cryptographers, but they always say, he is?
Oh, no. The CMU people have lots. Most of the good graduate students go up to Google and create screens like that, with some uncomfort perhaps, but you know, the pay is really good. So Privacy Manager. It's based in plumbing on the original Swiss stuff. It's Japanese enhanced, so it does the UTF-8. It came out of the CMU privacy research community. A lot of human subject testing, a lot more to come in this. This is grounded on science. We hope this is visible due to the NSTIC visibility, and lots of work ahead. So it's available on GitHub. I'm sure Stephen will have this downloaded by the end of the meeting. It's a well-researched and clear UI. It's informed consent enabled. I'll come to that in a second. It defaults to minimal release. So the very first time the screen comes up, it comes up with the minimum set of attributes necessary for the application to work properly. There's an interesting question about validating it. There he is. He's on GitHub, getting it right now. Hot off the press. I hope it installs. We'll see. It has histories and logs. It's easily configurable, designed for the spectrum of users. So, a couple of things about the screen. Sliders. Turns out, very useful tool. Notice that this slider doesn't have a slide. It's a minimal attribute. If you choose not to release it, the application will give you a 404 or something. The determination of minimal. Right now, we're doing that as part of our audit of the applications when they get a trust mark. We don't want to be auditors in the long term, but right now, we're attribute retentive ourselves. The value that's being released. One of the interesting questions I heard, and this is going to be deep in my core of uncomfort, is I showed this to the Swedes, and they said, well, we're going to take out the value that's being displayed. Why? I think more people will release the attribute. Just say, we're releasing your name and don't have it. At which point I go, wait, what side are you on? Do you want as informed consent as possible? And they go, well, sometimes we really want the aligned parties to be able to work, you know, kind of stuff. But that's the kind of dialogues and research and studies that we have hopefully up ahead for us in terms of the human subject testing that we'll be doing. His setting and history, I'll continue that. Remember I said yes versus accept? I just think of the Google accept as such a, you know, accept or die kind of thing, you know, accept Google's role in life. We're doing yes and no. I want to highlight the I button. This screen has already been changed so that we will have trust marks showing up here that says this application has been validated, and so use that information in helping you make your decision. Yeah, fine.
GTRI trust mark or like just sort of general trademark style trust
So
marks?
I've danced with John a lot on this stuff. We're doing human-readable trust marks. He's doing machine-readable trust marks. That's probably the biggest distinction at this point. That said, we both agree that trust marks need to have revocation. Trust marks need to have other aspects associated with it. A logo, so we can show it here. But he's doing machine-readable, and we're not ready for that. Frankly, we're not going to be ready for that for 15 years, but that's an issue. Just because this alone is going to be an engagement. The I button, informed consent. This comes up. One of the things I'm pressing everybody at these meetings about is what's the structure of informed consent. I raised it yesterday in the UX meeting. Is there, what we are showing here, and we've already changed the screen again to bold certain things, is we did a survey of users about what they want to know when they release. What are you going to use the information for? How long are you going to hold it for? How do you dispose of it? So I'd love to have some kind of either regulatory, is there a regulatory structure for informed consent? No. It's a gap. But we all talk about informed consent, but we haven't fleshed it out yet. I'd love for some activity to do that. So maybe some activity has done that. Again, regulation may have done that, but we've looked at the Euro regulation, nothing. You must have informed consent. What do you mean by informed consent? Mumble, mumble.
I'm curious, Denise stepped out, but in the COPPA world, is there anything there that, probably not.
No, not quite.
Did
Not
they get
not
any
to the
more-
level.
Not to the level
Not to the level
we're
that.
talking about here.
But that is when we. So one of the things that MSTIC has asked us to do and is supporting us doing is coming up with a proposal for standard terminology, standard iconography, and standard ways of asking and answering this question.
So we certainly don't mind working with you.
Yeah, but but we're focused on the very tight use case right now.
Gotcha.
The COPPA.
Right, the children's use case.
Yeah.
Are there any lawyers in the room?
Half a hand.
A recovering lawyer.
Not your typical privacy session.
Because I think that the notion of informed consent really is a common law contractual notion as distinct from anything else. And I'd just like to hear another opinion on that.
Yeah, and you might well be, but those of us building, deploying infrastructure need guidance. That's all I'm looking for. What should we have in there? And maybe the user surveys are the best we can do about what is it that you want to know before you give consent to it.
I'm just trying to remember whether there are any specific criteria for informed consent in the common rule, governing human subjects research. Because a key part of the common rule is informed consent, but I can't recall whether it provides any specific criteria.
I don't think so. And this issue of revocable is an interesting idea as well, and things like that. So we also keep log files, and this is the beginning of ask whether of the managing the pain of privacy. I would have done an online demo, except I blew it out of the water because I went through. I can do this wonderful thing now of releasing different sets of attributes to an application, and you see different behavior on the part of the application depending upon what attributes are released. So to the degree that you're privacy-centric and you're only releasing an opaque identifier, suddenly the application says, hi, 27416, versus, hi, Stuart Shapiro. And what capabilities you can do in the application, et cetera. So I go through all of this stuff, and then I go, wasn't that painful? Everybody nods. And then I go, so here's the screen where you're set to not see it for 6 months. I set it to not be seen, and I don't see the screen anymore to do the demo. I shot myself in the foot, and I've done this repeatedly, I will confess. And in about a month, I'm going to have a sandbox that I can do this where I can get a reset button on that or revoke the consent more likely so I can get back to the screen. But I'm an idiot, and you're listening to an idiot, what can I say? So last screen here. When I start to roll them all together, this is what it looks like. The line through this says, I've chosen not to send it. Again, no slider, you have to send it. The asterisk also indicates that. And then how do you want to be reminded, if at all, that you set this attribute release policy. Options, every 2, every 4, every 6, every 8, out of band. Would you like to be notified by an email message that attributes have been released? Would you like a web page where all of this stuff is stored?
It kind of strikes me as if I'm doing the same thing over and over, I'd probably be okay with that. If I'm doing 20 or 30 different apps and I'm trying to deal with this, it would probably get intrusive, or I would just be doing. But
again, for each app, you can store the history.
No, I understand. I appreciate that. But the question from user behavior comes down at the end of the day of whether it becomes an annoyance rather than a useful tool.
So, running way ahead of us, as always, you want the predictive software that they're starting to write now. That would say, based upon trust marks and other clues, your releases in other situations. But also imagine, I tried this yesterday and I got a thud. Imagine subscription services to privacy regimes. I like Glenn Beck. I'm sure that whatever he releases is what I'd like to release to sites. I'm going to sign up to the Glenn Beck profile. Glenn Beck attribute release service.
But the other side is,
I think that perhaps a bad example for this room.
But the other side is consumer reports, right? You could say
consumer reports.
Right. I would. So
well, in
I
fact,
love that idea.
So where this I button goes is so cool. Right now it goes to metadata, trust marks. The next thing they're going to be producing out of Carnegie Mellon is a reputation system base. What do my friends release to this site? You have to define a group of. So we created this as an open API, so we can run amok with informed consent from a variety of different sources. Just for that reason, just for the subscription services, just for the consumer reports options, etc.
To come back to one thing Stuart said, I think the universities really have a unique problem in that when you think about informed consent in the identity, or particularly in the biometrics field, where they're using the same test subjects over and over and over to justify having a big enough sample size that the results will be accepted by others. You're going to have all sorts of stuff in there just accumulated over time. So Stuart, it's kind of like, all right, what am I doing with this? Well, you're paying me $12 an hour to come twice a week to do what you're going to do for this particular test. And so it goes all over the wall.
Yep. This is kind of the roll-up of that activity. Again, lots of different options here, including out-of-band notification, never show this to me again, show it to me every time. Who are we trying to fit? Well, I'll come back to this. So, Alan Weston was a researcher in this space for many, many years, did years of surveys. Somebody has done longitudinal studies of his surveys, cool stuff, and come up with 3 classifications of humanity vis-a-vis privacy. The privacy fundamentalists, the pragmatics, and the unconcerned. 25% are fundamentalists according, now I don't know how this has changed over time. I'm really curious. I don't know how it's changed over digital technology. There's a session next month at a conference that I won't be able to go to that will discuss that. The pragmatics, 57%, the unconcerned, about 18%. How does privacy lens, and then these are the sets of privacy concerns that surveys have shown people have. So how does privacy lens do against the spectrum of users? So for the fundamentalists, fine-grained access control. You saw in the Google one, coarse grain, accept or die, fine-grained. Variety of informed consent mechanisms. The ability to review each transaction, and I think it's a very clean design on the screen. These people got that UI part right. For the pragmatics, when you first go to a website and you invoke the privacy lens, it comes up in the minimum set of attributes associated with that website. Now, most websites will say, if you give us more information, we'll give you a rubber squeeze stop, or extra storage, or I don't know what the analogs are in your part of the world, but I'm sure there's always the inducements. And so that's why
squeeze dolls. I want one of the squeeze dolls.
Squeeze dolls. So in recurring use, it comes up in my last use setting. For the unconcerned, it comes up in minimal. In recurring use, it comes up in the last use setting. And in fact, if you're really unconcerned, never see it again. So we'd like to believe the single tool can serve multiple interests. Yeah.
Is there a mechanism that enables applications to not be binary with regard to a minimal set of attributes? So for example, instead of, here's the minimal set of attributes, it either works or it doesn't, it's minimal attributes for it to work at all, but then with these other attributes, if you give us these, you get these other features in the app get turned on or will work. So
yes, right. Now, that's not so much a UI issue as it's going to be how does the metadata begin to convey this kind of stuff? Because, again, we're very metadata. But it's just a tag for us. So the answer is yes. A capability intrinsic in the infrastructure, but not yet implemented. I want to be clear about that. Where are we going on this stuff? We're moving it to V10. I think we're going to be 10, we hope, early October, because I'm about to have a lot of people pound on it. We're going to share it internationally. I've already done that. We're going to develop the informed consent mechanisms. There was a lot under the cover in some of these some of these screens. Let me go back to this screen. Full name is not an attribute in any directory that I know. We have first name, we have last name, we have the Spanish surname problem. We did something behind the scenes to roll this up to create a new attribute because people want to deal with that granularity. So there's the idea of we want to be able to add these capabilities to it. We need to be able to bundle attributes. As we've learned, attributes tend to travel in bundles anyway. So for the RNS application, we released 4 attributes: a display name, a login name, an affiliation, and an opaque identifier or something. And lots of applications say, that's my sweet spot. Those are what I need. So how do we show a bundle here versus just the individual attributes? Another UI issue that we'll be tackling. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say on your bundle for kids, first and last name is PII, but first name and first initial of the last name, and it's useful in the kids bundle because Denise T wants to share with 10 friends to come back to the project. So.
Well, the really sweet spot to use display name because that is
display name. Yeah.
And so, you know, we've had this conversation about you need non-personally identifiable options which users can set. Where would we get that from? Well, that's a standard attribute in every directory right now is display name. It's just a question of enabling users to actually change it.
But then if you have a display name that it gets used across a bunch of different properties, it now becomes PII because it is unique and you can track the child across properties. So under COPPA, display name can become PII depending on how it's being.
And again, you probably, well, since you control your own IDP, you can control.
We're trying to push the display name out to the RPs.
Good. Okay. We're adding UMA capability. So the last screen there that said, continue or yes, we'll also have an option on it, which is store these for offline use, and then all the UMA-centric applications can come in and do that. Most of the plumbing for that is in place. We want to port this to OpenID Connect and OAuth, because frankly, we're not SAML fascista. We recognize multiple other protocols. What our loyalty to is a single user experience, regardless of what the protocol is. The user certainly doesn't know which protocol they're working on. And so we're going to port this over to, we hope, to the other major attribute flows. We want to study the effectiveness of this. To be candid, there's a constant tussle between me and the developers here because they want to get to the research. And I'm going, I need implementation. And in particular, one of the ways that this implementation that you may be downloading fails is that their idea of number of applications was tens. Mine is thousands. So their infrastructure to support that needs to be revisited. The UI doesn't, but the internal, so they create separate log files, et cetera. That stuff needs to be redone, and they know it already, and we're starting to do that. And then the predictive assists. Who is it who is asking for the predictive assists so that we don't have to, no, tell me what I normally do in this situation. And so this is another really sweet spot for the research community. They're really excited about the potential for this.
And do you have any issues in your environment of multiple display names for the same individual who may have registered as, say, Jim Zog versus Jay Zog?
So the really interesting issue so we don't have that right now. But what we do have, which is grievous, is for most of our work we use group management for access control. And it works for 85 and 90% of the use cases out there. So What?
That's an answer.
Except for the fact that inside the directory now we have an attribute is member of. So there's a string of groups. We don't want to release all the groups to a line party. We just want to release a few groups. So how do we handle attribute release in multi-valued attributes? The next UI interface to cross, assuming we get it. Being attribute rich. So one of the things that we've been working on in this space is with the GPII folks, and it's nice to be talking about this in NIST because NIST has a working group on cloud accessibility, and we're looped with those people, and we're all centered around, wow, there's been good work done internationally in this space. How can we tap into it? And GPII is that work. They already have a schema, which was the hard part. 9 pages worth of accessibility attributes. Done, baked, open. It's the only freaking standard I've seen from ISO, which you can download without cost. No offense to ISO, but
It must have been an oversight.
no. It was 2 apple pie. How can you charge for, So it's 9 pages of attributes. Nobody wants to set 9 pages of attributes. So these good people at GPII are already developing tools that will allow a medical practitioner to say, here's your prescription, there's your compensatory attribute. Load it into your IDP, and away you go. These people are thinking extremely holistically. I'm really impressed. One of the great things they're working on is not just physical disabilities and aging, which I respond to a lot these days, but they also deal with instances where the compensatory behavior for the application cannot be done on the user side. A prime example is, I have all my settings inside my browser for this kind of stuff. Supposing I have a traumatic brain injury, and unfortunately as a nation we're producing a lot of people with traumatic brain injuries at this point, one of the standard behavioral results of that is the inability to do depth-first search. Suddenly it has to be linear. That's reformatting content. I can't do that on my side. I have to have the RP do that. We have a problem, I'll report this to NIST right now, and the NPO, which is that there is unclear directives to content providers about whether reformatting content violates copyright or not. So doing color blindness, no problem. They respond to that. But if I have to reformat the content to be linear, have I destroyed the copyright ownership of the user? I don't think so. And I think there's a cover, a national policy that could be created that says, if we're going to create all these people with traumatic brain injuries, we're going to create a mechanism so that they can view content. We'll see how it goes. So I commend the GPII work. And what we're now doing is beginning to bundle attributes so I can release the attributes necessary to view a federal job website, but I don't have to let them know at this point that I'm mobility impaired. It isn't all or nothing. So the ability to combine accessibility and privacy in the same sentence, I believe, is new frontier. And we hope to be able to do that. Now, we have to understand exactly what those bundles are, but again, the GPII crowd is really good with that. The veteran support stuff, we'll see how it goes. And so I did a webinar about a week ago on this stuff, and I asked hundreds of institutions online, what do you think about end-user consent tools? And I expected everybody to answer, Federation is really hard already, but in fact, we needed this yesterday with the overwhelming response. We might actually get this sucker out the door. We might actually get it deployed, and we might actually get it refined.
How did you get away with nobody answering, let them suffer?
And then
some of them were probably thinking it.
Okay. And then we we asked for the interest in the next gen accessibility stuff, and that was all over. That was everybody was really enthusiastic. And here's how you can stay engaged, and that's the end of it. So I love reactions, I love comments, I love screen stories or spitballs.
I can't remember, but do we already have a mechanism for folks? Because I know anybody can go out and they can look at your demo online, they can download the code. Is there a mechanism to get you feedback and filter?
coming out next week on the LARC website will be a couple of lists. In particular, in this space, there will be a privacy lens deploy, which I think is only for those people who go, hey, didn't compile. And there is going to be a privacy lens UI list, which is going to be open. I'm going to send it out to the IDESG. And it allows everybody to go, gee, Puce. We need Puce in the diagram. Or you're using too much space on the screen, and we really like the Google one size fits no one.
Where's all my white space?
Where's all my white space? We expect those comments. So yes, there will be starting next week. More feedback. Stuart.
All right. So let me suggest the next problem you should tackle after you've gotten all of this worked out and done. So maybe a couple.
Trout fishing, I hope.
Well, for your apprentice can take it on. So all right. So I authorize an app to, let's say I'm on my phone. All right. I authorize the release of attributes to an app so it can do whatever it does. And in a lot of cases, the app is actually going to generate stuff. As I use it, it generates stuff. And some of that stuff could be considered to constitute attributes because the stuff, applies to me or reflects me in some way. And some of that stuff is getting sent off to God only knows where. So it seems to me that down the road, well, I guess it was down the road in an R&D sense. I mean, the issue is here right now. There's kind of a secondary release issue. The first issue is releasing attributes to the app. The second issue is releasing attributes that the app has generated to somewhere. And personally, I would love to have some measure of control, not only over what it's getting, but what it's sending out. And my pet kind of example or peeve is e-readers, okay? Most of us probably already know, that whenever you use an e-reader, it's communicating with some server somewhere, and it's actually keeping track of your reading habits and kind of, not just, where you last left off so it can sync it on all of your devices, but it's keeping track of other stuff like, how many times you went back and had to reread something and whether you skip ahead and just, I think probably the granularity would rather shock most of us. And there has been talk amongst some of the e-reader vendors about actually selling this information, these statistics to authors. And of course they say, well, it's all de-identified, it's all anonymized, whatever the hell that actually means in practice. And while I like having my bookmarks synced, I really don't want to be sending out detailed, highly granular information about how I read stuff. And whether or not the vendor thinks that's reasonable, I really don't care. I don't want to be saying stuff, and I would love to be able to shut it off.
So there's two issues there, Stuart. First is the vendor issue, that they don't want you to do that. And so none of this stuff, getting the vendor to play neat and nice is a separate set of issues. All we're doing in our case is we certify minimum sets of attributes. The vendor can then go forward and ask for lots of other things along the way. The second thing would need to be a schema around these attributes that could be backed from the relying party side back to a place where you can control it. So it would be an ancillary schema back in your IDP. And one of my visions for NSTIC down the road is for it to say, these are the meaningful schema in life, including GPII schema, and these are the ones that you should stock as an IDP in order to be a full player in the identity ecosystem. So I think there's a set of, and I just was talking to Anil about this, because I wanted in the identifier space because privacy gets screwed in that first authentication assertion if you pass the wrong identifier. You're dead immediately. So I want somebody to embrace a set of normative identifiers back, and say, if you're an IDP playing in the ecosystem and you want to be certified, you have to have the capability to create and store and have the end user manage these identifiers. Your schema for e-readers or the GPII would be additional schema that would be embraced by the ID ecosystem as normalization of the space. So a marketplace could be created, and whoever, as long as you're buying your identity from an authoritative IDP, you know that your medical practitioner can send your diagnostic accessibility stuff directly to the IDP, and the IDP has to do it. So I think it's part of my vision for NSTIC, but I certainly haven't asked the NPO about that. But I think it's where, it's the payloads. It's not the protocols. It's the payload to all the actions. It's the attributes, blah, blah, blah. Here I am again. But I don't see how, well, in fact, I was in an earlier meeting with FICAM where they're talking about attribute bundles, and, it's here. Other comments, questions?
Give me an idea of the timeline for things that go off. Totally.
It depends. We have interest. We have the OWASP crowd and the OpenID Connect crowd are interested. Even the CIPM crowd is interested because, most people haven't done the UI. And having a normative UI would be just the way I can take any web browser or any rent-a-car and kind of drive it, because controls have the same thing. So, yeah.
Well, I know, Ken, this is kind of premature, but understanding that it is available open source, if somebody were interested in porting it to OAuth or OpenID Connect, and would you be, I know you haven't figured out exactly how you would then retroactively,
Right.
consolidate it, but would you be open to considering that type of a collaboration?
Oh, absolutely. We don't want to do all this work ourselves. No. But so we're certainly open to collaboration on the UI piece. So, I don't know anybody in this room knows Scott Cantor, but he's the wizard behind SAML. And we're doing IDP v3 for SHIB, which is kind of the plateau. So I asked Scott, who's a deep geek, how much of this stuff will be usable in IDP v3? And he said, you have to throw it all away. The UI. Oh, no, you can keep that. The infrastructure that supports the UI, the log tables, etc. Oh, no, you can keep that. So what do I have to throw away, Scott? Oh, a library that connects it to SAML. I'm ready to throw that away yesterday, because I want the same interface across any protocol. And he goes, okay, well, then that stuff will move. So, yes, I think we're designing it so that the infrastructure for the UI, separate from the protocol, can be remounted. We're hopeful. We have refinements. And again, they have not built that infrastructure to scale yet. That's the end of it. That was what jumped out at me. Is if they think 10 apps is what's the steady state is going to be, these are academics. If they think 4,000 apps and a predictive capability is what's needed, yes. But that remains to be seen in future work, as they say. Other comments?
And just to do the time check, it is 1 o'clock now.
I'm done. I never got lunch. Feedback. Are we? Good job. Cool. Yeah. Good stuff. Bad stuff. Different than Google.
God bless you.
There you go.
Well, again, thank you for giving up your lunch for losing your lunch, or whatever this whatever this resulted in.
Thank you.